My name is Eliza, 34 years old, and last night I slept in my car outside the house I've been paying for since I was 22. For 12 years, I worked 3 jobs to keep my family afloat, while my younger sister Sophie pursued her dreams in Paris. Yesterday, she came home with news that changed everything. Before I share what happened that destroyed our family, please let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. The story of how I ended up homeless outside my own house started 14 years ago, when everything fell apart for our family. My father Robert had been working at the same manufacturing company for 25 years when they suddenly filed for bankruptcy. Just like that, at 52 years old, he found himself unemployed with no severance and a mortgage that still had 15 years left on it. The timing couldn't have been worse. My mother Margaret had just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and the medication alone cost $600 a month without insurance. I was 20 years old in my third year of pre-med at Northwestern University, watching my dream of becoming a doctor, when my parents sat me down one evening. "Eliza, we need to talk." My father said, his hands trembling as he held my mother's. "We're going to lose the house if we can't make next month's payment." My sister Sophie was 18, then fresh out of high school with a full scholarship to study art in Paris. She sat across from me, her portfolio of paintings spread on the coffee table, acceptance letter from École des Beaux-Arts shining like a golden ticket. "I can defer for a year," Sophie offered half-heartedly, but my parents immediately shut that down. "Absolutely not," my mother insisted. "This opportunity won't come again. You have a gift, Sophie. We'll figure something out." I looked at the numbers they'd scribbled on a napkin. Mortgage payment of $1,800. Mom's medication at $600. Utilities running $400. Food for 4 people at $500 minimum. It added up to over $3,000 a month, just to survive, not counting Sophie's living expenses in Paris. "I'll take a semester off," I heard myself saying. "Get a job, help out until Dad finds something." That semester turned into forever. I never went back to Northwestern. Instead, I became the foundation that held our family together. Every morning at 5, I'd drive to the local diner where I waited tables for the breakfast and lunch crowd. The smell of bacon grease became my morning perfume, and my feet learned to navigate the sticky floors in worn sneakers that I couldn't afford to replace. After my shift at the diner, I'd rush to my afternoon job doing bookkeeping for a small construction company. The owner, Mr. Peterson, had known my father for years and hired me out of pity, teaching me QuickBooks in his cramped office that smelled like cigarettes and instant coffee. From 4 to 8 every evening, I'd enter invoices and chase down payments from contractors, who always seemed to be 30 days behind. 3 nights a week, I tutored high school kids in math and science, the subjects I'd once loved enough to dream of medical school. Sitting at kitchen tables across town, I'd explain chemical equations and calculus problems, while their parents made dinner in the background, living the normal family life I'd given up. The money started coming in. $4,500 a month, sometimes more if I picked up extra shifts. I handled it all, creating spreadsheets that tracked every penny. $1,800 for the mortgage went straight to the bank on the first of each month. $600 for Mom's medication, carefully rationed to make sure we never ran out. $400 for utilities, juggling payment dates when money was tight. $500 for groceries, clipping coupons and shopping sales like my life depended on it. And then there was Sophie. My parents insisted she needed support to fully embrace her opportunity. "Artists need to focus on their craft," my mother would say, transferring another $800 to Sophie's account in Paris. "She can't work and study at the same time. It would compromise her talent." I wanted to scream that I'd been studying to be a doctor, that I'd had talent too. Dreams of my own that were now buried under a mountain of bills and responsibilities. But I kept quiet, because that's what good daughters do. We sacrifice. We endure. We hold everyone else up even when we're drowning. Sophie would send photos from Paris, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower at gallery openings, her paintings displayed in student exhibitions. My parents would gather around, the computer, tears in their eyes, so proud of their artistic daughter living her dream. Meanwhile, I'd collapse into bed at midnight, setting my alarm for 4:30 to do it all again. "Sophie's professor says she has real promise," my mother told anyone who would listen at church, at the grocery store, to the mailman. He's connecting her with galleries. She could be the next big thing. Nobody mentioned that I'd been on the dean's list at Northwestern. Nobody talked about the research position I'd given up, or the professor who'd written that I had the potential to be an exceptional physician. I became invisible, just the daughter who worked, who paid bills, who kept the lights on. My father tried finding work, but at his age in our town, opportunities were scarce. He picked up odd jobs here and there, handyman work that paid under the table, but it was never enough to make a real difference. The rejection letters piled up, and I watched him sink deeper into depression, spending his days in front of the television, escaping into other people's stories. "You're so good at managing everything," he'd say to me, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Eliza." But being needed isn't the same as being seen. Being relied upon isn't the same as being valued. I learned this lesson slowly, painfully, over years of being the forgotten daughter who made everything possible. Sophie graduated after 4 years with honors. She sent photos of the ceremony, her in a beautiful dress our parents had somehow scraped together money for, holding her diploma like a trophy. She was staying in Paris, she announced, to pursue her career. Just a little longer, she promised. Once she was established, she'd help support the family. "I'm so close to breaking through," she wrote in emails that came less and less frequently. "There's interest from several galleries. I just need more time to build my portfolio, make connections. You understand, don't you, Eliza?" I understood that I was 26 and had spent 6 years of my life in suspended animation. I understood that my friends from Northwestern had graduated, gone to medical school, started their careers. I understood that I woke up every day in the same childhood bedroom in the same house I was killing myself to keep, while my sister lived the life I'd sacrificed mine for. The night Sophie came home changed everything. It was a Thursday in October, and I'd spent the entire day preparing. The house was spotless, every surface scrubbed until it gleamed. I'd saved for 2 weeks to afford the ingredients for her favorite meal, the pot roast our grandmother used to make for special occasions. The dining table was set with our mother's good china, the plates she only brought out for Christmas and Easter. Sophie walked through the door looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. 4 years in Paris had transformed her from a pretty teenager into a sophisticated woman. Her clothes draped perfectly on her slim frame, clearly designer even to my untrained eye. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob that probably cost more than I made in a week at the diner. Diamond earrings caught the light when she turned her head, and I wondered how an artist struggling to establish herself could afford them. "Eliza!" she exclaimed, air kissing my cheeks in the European style. "You look the same." I was wearing my best outfit, a dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a job interview I didn't get. Next to Sophie, I felt like what I was, a small-town woman who'd aged 10 years in the past 4, exhaustion written in the lines around my eyes. My parents rushed to embrace her, my mother crying with joy, my father suddenly animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. We sat down to dinner, and Sophie regaled us with stories of Paris, dropping names of artists and galleries, using French phrases that made our parents beam with pride. "The art scene there is just incomparable," she said, delicately cutting her meat. "I've been so fortunate to be part of it. Actually, that's part of why I'm here." My mother leaned forward eagerly. "Tell us everything, sweetheart." Sophie set down her fork and smiled a smile I remembered from childhood when she was about to ask for something big. "I'm engaged." The room erupted. My mother shrieked with delight, my father demanded details, and I sat frozen watching this scene unfold like a movie I couldn't pause. "His name is Antoine," Sophie continued, pulling out her phone to show photos. "He's an established artist, quite successful. He has connections throughout Europe. We're going to be such a power couple in the art world." Antoine was handsome in that casual European way, all scarves and stubble and brooding expressions. In every photo, Sophie gazed at him adoringly, while he looked somewhere past the camera, too artistic to smile. "When's the wedding?" my mother asked, already planning. I could see it in her eyes. "Next spring in Paris, of course. But here's the exciting part," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling. "Antoine and I are opening our own gallery. It's an amazing opportunity, a chance to showcase emerging artists alongside our own work. The space is perfect, right in the Marais district." "That's wonderful," my father said, though I could see him doing the math in his head, wondering how we'd afford plane tickets to Paris for a wedding. "There's just one small thing," Sophie continued, and there it was, the ask I'd been waiting for. "We need capital. $50,000 for the initial investment. And I was thinking, well, the house must have quite a bit of equity by now. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I set down my water glass carefully, afraid I might shatter it in my hand. You want to borrow against the house? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Sophie laughed that tinkling laugh she'd perfected. Not borrow, silly, sell. I mean, let's be honest, this place is too big for just mom and dad now. They could get something smaller, more manageable. Use part of the money for the gallery and the rest for a nice little condo. The house isn't paid off, I said slowly, as if explaining to a child. There's still 3 years left on the mortgage. But there's equity, Sophie insisted. Houses in this neighborhood have gone up in value. I checked online. We could clear at least $200,000 after paying off the mortgage. As if she'd contributed a single penny to the $180,000 I'd paid over the past 12 years. Sophie, I began, but my mother interrupted. It's something to consider, she said thoughtfully, for your future sweetheart. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Consider, Mom, I've been paying the mortgage for 12 years. Every single payment. This house is standing because of me. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly. We all make sacrifices for family, Eliza. I've been building a career that will elevate our family's standing. Not everything is about money. No, but keeping a roof over our heads is definitely about money. I shot back. The money I've earned working 3 jobs since I was 20. My father shifted uncomfortably. Now let's not argue. We're a family. We support each other. Support? I pulled out my phone, opening the spreadsheet I'd maintained religiously. Would you like to see what support looks like? 12 years of mortgage payments totaling $216,000. Mom's medication, another $86,000. Utilities, $57,000. Groceries, $72,000. Money sent to Sophie, $38,000. Should I continue? The room went silent. Sophie's perfect composure cracked slightly. You kept track like we're some kind of business transaction. I kept track because no one else was paying attention, I said. Because while you were sipping wine in Montmartre, I was here making sure our parents had electricity and food. I was getting an education, Sophie said defensively. Developing my talent. Mom and Dad understood that. They believed in me. And nobody believed in me. The words came out raw, years of suppressed pain bleeding through. I was in pre-med, Sophie. I had a 3.9 GPA. I gave it up so you could chase your dreams. My mother reached for my hand. Oh, Eliza, we appreciate everything you've done, but Sophie has a real opportunity here. Antoine's family has connections. This gallery could set her up for life. I pulled my hand away. And what about my life? When do I get to be more than the family ATM? Sophie stood up, tears forming in her eyes, the manipulation as natural as breathing. I can't believe you're being so selfish. This is my chance at happiness, at success, and you're making it about money. I thought you loved me. I do love you, I said, standing as well. But love doesn't mean I have to keep lighting myself on fire to keep you warm. My father's face darkened. Eliza, that's enough. Your sister is getting married, starting her life. As the older sister, you should be supporting her, not tearing her down. Supporting her? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been supporting all of you. And I'm telling you right now, this house is not for sale, not without my consent. Sophie's tears dried instantly. Your consent? Last I checked, the house is in Mom and Dad's names. She was right, of course. Legally, I had no claim, despite paying for everything. I'd trusted my parents, believed that my contributions would be recognized, valued. What a fool I'd been. If you sell this house, I said quietly, you're selling my future, everything I've worked for. My mother stood, moving to Sophie's side. You're being dramatic, Eliza. We're not selling anything tonight. But Sophie's right that we need to think about the future. Her future. Always Sophie's future. Never mine. The next 3 days were a masterclass in manipulation. Sophie had perfected her craft in Paris, but I suspected she'd always had this talent. She worked on our parents separately and together, painting pictures of the glamorous life she'd lead as a gallery owner, the success that would reflect on our family, the grandchildren who would grow up cultured and sophisticated. I tried to counter with logic, with numbers, with the raw truth of our situation. I showed them my payment history, bank statements, the careful records I'd kept. But numbers are cold things, and Sophie's dreams were warm and golden. On Sunday morning, I found them in the kitchen, papers spread across the table. A real estate agent's business card sat prominently in the center. "We're just exploring options," my father said, not meeting my eyes. Sophie sat at the table, her laptop open to a presentation she'd created about the gallery opportunity. She'd included photos of the space projected revenues, even a mission statement about supporting emerging artists. It was professional, compelling, and completely detached from reality. "Look at these numbers, Eliza," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Within 2 years, we'll be profitable. I can pay everyone back with interest." "These are fantasies," I said, scanning her projections. "You're assuming 60% capacity from month one. That's impossible for a new gallery. Antoine's family will drive traffic. They're very well connected." "Then why don't they invest the 50,000? Sophie's jaw tightened. "They're contributing in other ways, connections, expertise." "So they contribute connections, and my 12 years of labor gets cashed out for your gamble." "It's not a gamble," my mother interjected. "It's an investment in Sophie's future, in our family's future." I looked at the three of them united against me and felt something fundamental break inside. What about my investment? What about the $300,000 I've already put into this family? "You chose to help," Sophie said coldly. "No one forced you." "I was 20 years old," I said. "Dad had just lost his job, Mom was sick. What choice did I have?" "There's always a choice," Sophie replied. "You chose to be the martyr. Don't blame us for that." The word martyr hit like a slap. Is that how they saw me? Not as someone who'd sacrificed everything to keep them afloat, but as someone who'd chosen to suffer for attention. That night I couldn't sleep. I went through my files, pulling together every piece of documentation I had. 12 years of bank statements, receipts, tax returns, showing my income and where it went. I also did something I'd never done before. I looked up Sophie on social media, really looked. Her Instagram was a carefully curated feed of Parisian life, but I knew how to dig deeper. Tagged photos from friends' stories that had been screenshotted and shared the digital trail that told a different story than the struggling artist narrative she'd sold our parents. There was Sophie at exclusive parties wearing different designer dresses to each one. Sophie on vacation in Monaco, Santorini, the Swiss Alps. Sophie at art auctions where the cheapest piece cost more than I made in a year. And in the comments, mentions of sales, congratulations on pieces that sold for 5 figures. She hadn't been struggling. She'd been thriving, and she'd still taken the $800 I sent every month. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking with rage. But the final blow came from a French art blog I found through Google, an interview with Sophie from 6 months ago, where she talked about her success, mentioning that she'd already sold over $200,000 worth of art in her first 3 years out of school. $200,000. While I was skipping meals to save money to send her, she'd been earning 6 figures and never said a word. I printed the article and walked back to the kitchen where my family was still discussing the house sale. I slammed the pages on the table. "Explain this," I said to Sophie. She glanced at the article, her face paling slightly before recovering. It's complicated. Sales don't equal profit. There are cost, material, studio space. 200,000 in sales and you still needed my 800 a month. My parents looked confused, struggling to process this information. "I was investing in my career," Sophie said smoothly. "Every artist has lean periods. The sales were sporadic. Sporadic enough to afford designer clothes and vacations to Monaco. Those were gifts," she said quickly. "From Antoine, from friends. You wouldn't understand the networking required in my world." "You're right," I said. "I wouldn't understand because I've been too busy working 3 jobs to network with anyone except other exhausted people trying to survive." My father picked up the article, reading it slowly. "Sophie, is this true? You've been earning this kind of money." "It's not what it seems," Sophie insisted. "The art world is complex. Money comes and goes. I needed the stability of Eliza's support to take risks." "My support?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my slavery?" "Don't be so dramatic," Sophie snapped. "You made your choices, I made mine. Mine just happened to be more successful." My mother, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. "What's done is done. We need to focus on the future now." The future, I said. Let me tell you about my future. I'm 34 years old. I have no degree, no career advancement, no savings because every penny went to this family. My future was mortgaged for Sophie's present, and now you want to literally sell the only thing I have to show for it. The house isn't yours, Eliza, Sophie said coldly. You may have paid for it, but legally it belongs to Mom and Dad, and they're free to do what they want with it. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me, to acknowledge what I'd done. My mother looked away. My father studied his hands. So that's it, I asked quietly. 12 years mean nothing. Of course they mean something, my mother said weakly. We're grateful, Eliza, but Sophie needs this opportunity. And I needed to finish medical school, I shot back. But nobody fought for that, did they? The ultimatum came that evening. I'd retreated to my room, the same room I'd had since childhood, surrounded by the remnants of the life I'd never gotten to live. My old Northwestern textbook still sat on the shelf, covered in dust. My acceptance letter to medical school, the one I'd had to decline, was tucked in a drawer like a relic of another person's life. The knock on my door was soft, tentative. My mother entered, followed by my father, and finally Sophie. They arranged themselves like a tribunal, my parents on the bed, Sophie leaning against the dresser. We've made a decision. My father began, his voice formal, distant. The house is going on the market. I felt the floor drop out from under me. You can't be serious. Sophie has shown us the numbers, my mother added. The gallery really is a good investment. And we're getting older, Eliza. A smaller place would be easier to manage. A smaller place you'll pay for how? I asked. Dad still doesn't have a job. Mom's medication isn't getting any cheaper. Sophie will help once the gallery is profitable, my mother said, and even she didn't sound convinced. Sophie stepped forward, holding a document. We need you to sign this. What is it? A statement that you won't contest the sale, that you acknowledge you have no legal claim to the property despite your contributions. I stared at the paper, the legal language swimming before my eyes. You want me to sign away any moral claim to the house I've paid for? It's just a formality, Sophie said, to make the sale smoother. And if I don't sign? My parents exchanged glances. My father cleared his throat. Then we'll have to ask you to leave. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Leave? This is my home. No, Sophie corrected. It's Mom and Dad's home. You're a tenant who doesn't pay rent. I paid all the rent, I said, my voice rising. I paid everything. And now you're done, Sophie said simply. Sign the paper and you can stay until the house sells. Don't sign and you leave tonight. I looked at my parents, these people I'd sacrificed everything for. You're really doing this. You're choosing her money fantasy over the daughter who saved you. My mother was crying now, but she nodded. Sophie's our future, Eliza. You're strong. You'll be fine. Strong. The word people use when they want to justify breaking you. How long do I have to decide? I asked. 1 hour, Sophie said, checking her phone. I have a call with Antoine at 9. I'd like to tell him the good news. They filed out, leaving me alone with the document. I read it 3 times, each word another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my family. It wasn't just asking me to give up legal claims. It included a non-disclosure agreement about our family's financial arrangements and my contributions. Sophie had thought of everything. She wanted me erased from the narrative completely. I sat on my bed looking around the room. The water stain on the ceiling I'd patched myself when I couldn't afford a proper repair. The secondhand desk where I'd studied for the MCAT, scoring in the 95th percentile before walking away from it all. The window that overlooked the garden I'd maintained because my parents couldn't afford a landscaper. This house was more than shelter. It was 12 years of my life crystallized into wood and brick. Every mortgage payment had been a brick in the foundation of my family's stability. Now they wanted to demolish it all for Sophie's Parisian pipe dream. I thought about signing. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to sacrifice, to accommodate, to be the good daughter, wanted to just give in, keep the peace, make everyone happy. But I was so tired of being strong for everyone else, so tired of being invisible, so tired of being grateful for scraps while Sophie feasted on my labor. I stood up and began packing. Not much, just the essentials. My documents, my laptop, some clothes, my old medical school acceptance letter. The photo of me at my Northwestern graduation, the one my parents had forgotten to attend because Sophie had a recital the same day. When the hour was up, they returned. The hope in their eyes dimmed when they saw my packed bags. "You're leaving?" my mother asked, as if she couldn't quite believe it. I handed the unsigned document to Sophie. "I'm done being your safety net." "You're being ridiculous," Sophie said. "Over what pride, dignity," I corrected. "Something you wouldn't understand." My father stood up, anger flashing across his face. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked. "Name one sacrifice you've made for my benefit in the last 12 years. Silence. I picked up my bags. "That's what I thought." Sophie blocked my path. "You'll regret this. When the house sells, you'll get nothing, not a penny." "I've been getting nothing for years," I said. "At least now I'll be free." I pushed past her, walked down the stairs I'd climbed thousands of times, through the kitchen I'd painted myself, past the living room, where my diploma should have hung next to Sophie's art. My mother called after me, "Where will you go?" I turned at the door, looking back one last time at the three of them, my family who had chosen Sophie's potential over my reality. "Anywhere but here," I said, and walked out. The door closing behind me was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. My car became my home that first night. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour grocery store, reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, and wrapped myself in the emergency blanket I kept in the trunk. The tears came, then 12 years of suppressed grief flooding out in the darkness. I wasn't crying for the house, not really. I was mourning the family I thought I had, the love I thought we shared. Every sacrifice I'd made had been a deposit in an account I thought would eventually pay dividends of recognition, appreciation, maybe even reciprocal support. But that account had been empty all along, a void I'd been pouring myself into. At 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and drove to the diner where I still worked morning shifts. Marie, the night manager, took one look at me and poured a cup of coffee without asking questions. "You look like hell," she said simply. "Family troubles," I replied. She nodded knowingly. "The house situation." I'd never told anyone at work about my family dynamics, but Marie had eyes. She'd seen me counting tips, obsessively calculating if I had enough for Mom's medication. She'd watched me skip meals to save money while sending cash to Paris. "They kicked me out," I admitted, "giving the house to my sister." Marie whistled low. "After everything you've done..." "Apparently everything I've done doesn't matter." She studied me for a long moment. "You know my son just moved out. I've got a spare room, 600 a month, utilities included. It's not fancy, but it's clean." I almost started crying again. This woman who barely knew me was offering more support than my own family. "I can't afford that right now," I admitted. "I only have 2,000 in savings." "Pay me when you can," Marie said. "You're good for it. I've watched you work yourself to the bone for years. About time someone gave you a break." I moved into Marie's spare room the next day. It was small, just a bed dresser and tiny closet, but it was mine in a way nothing had been for years. I hung my Northwestern acceptance letter on the wall as a reminder of who I used to be, who I could maybe still become. The first week was the hardest. My phone rang constantly with calls from my parents, texts from Sophie, alternating between anger and manipulation. I didn't answer any of them. I needed space to think, to process, to figure out my next move. That's when I met Linda at the construction company. She was a new client, a lawyer who specialized in financial abuse cases. She came in to discuss some invoicing, and something about my situation must have shown on my face because she asked if I was okay. I don't know why I told her. Maybe because she was a stranger. Maybe because I was desperate. But the whole story came pouring out. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. "Do you have documentation of your payments?" she asked when I finished. "Everything. 12 years of records." Her eyes sharpened. "And the house is in your parents' names." "Yes, but wait." I remembered something. 5 years ago, they did something with the deed. Tax purposes, they said. I signed some papers. Linda leaned forward. "Do you have copies of those papers?" I did filed away in my obsessive record keeping. I pulled them up on my phone, emailed them to her. She read them on her tablet, her expression growing more interested with each page. Eliza, she said slowly, your parents transferred the deed to you 5 years ago. The world tilted. What? Right here. They used a quit claim deed to transfer ownership to you, probably to avoid tax implications from your father's unemployment. The house is in your name. But they said, Sophie showed me the deed online. She showed you an old record. Counties are slow to update online databases. I can pull the actual current deed from the recorder's office. My hands were shaking. So when they tried to kick me out, they were trying to kick you out of your own house. Illegally. The next few hours were a blur. Linda, who insisted on taking my case pro bono, helped me file the necessary paperwork to prove ownership. She also discovered something else in her research. Sophie had been trying to get my parents to sign a power of attorney document that would have given her the ability to sell the house on my behalf, forging my signature. This is fraud, Linda said bluntly. Your sister could face serious charges. Armed with this information, I hired a private investigator with the last of my savings. If Sophie had been lying about the house, what else had she lied about? The investigator's report came back a week later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Antoine, the successful artist Sophie was engaged to. He was married with 2 children in Lyon. His wife had no idea about Sophie. The gallery they were supposedly opening. The space had already been rented to someone else months ago. The $50,000 Antoine had gambling debts that were catching up to him. But the worst part was Sophie's financial records. She hadn't just been earning from art sales. She'd been taking loans in our parents' names, using their information she'd gathered over the years. They were on the hook for nearly $100,000 they didn't know about. I sat in Linda's office staring at the evidence of my sister's betrayal. This went so far beyond sibling rivalry or favoritism. This was systematic destruction of our family for her personal gain. What do you want to do? Linda asked. I thought about my parents, how they'd chosen Sophie over me. Part of me wanted to let them deal with the consequences of their choice. But I also thought about my mother's diabetes medication, my father's depression. They were victims too, even if they'd been willing ones. I want my house, I said firmly, and I want Sophie to face consequences. But I need to protect my parents from the financial ruin she's created. Linda smiled. I think we can arrange that. The plan was simple but effective. I would assert my ownership of the house, preventing any sale. I would also file charges against Sophie for attempted fraud regarding the forged power of attorney. In exchange for not pursuing additional charges and helping my parents with the debt she'd created in their names, Sophie would have to pay restitution and stay away from the family finances. But first, I needed to confront them all with the truth. I scheduled a meeting at the House My House for the following Saturday. I asked Linda to be there as my legal representation. I also invited my parents' pastor, someone I hoped could be a neutral mediator. Walking back into that house felt like entering a battlefield. My parents sat on the couch looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen them. Sophie was pacing her phone in hand, probably texting Antoine. Thank you for coming, she said sarcastically when she saw me. Ready to be reasonable. Actually, yes, I said, setting my briefcase on the table. Let's start with the house. I pulled out the deed, the real one, and placed it in front of them. As you can see, the house has been in my name for 5 years. The color drained from Sophie's face. My parents looked confused. That's impossible, my father said. We never… You did, I interrupted. You transferred it to me for tax purposes when you were unemployed. You probably forgot given everything else that was happening. Sophie grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. This has to be fake. Linda stepped forward. I can assure you it's quite real. I verified it with the county recorder myself. But even so, Mom, Sophie rallied. You've been letting Mom and Dad live here. That establishes… Actually, Linda interrupted, Eliza has been paying all housing expenses, which establishes her as the owner-occupant. Your parents are technically her tenants. The room was silent except for Sophie's harsh breathing. There's more, I said, pulling out the investigator's report. Antoine is married, has been for 10 years, 2 kids. Sophie's phone clattered to the floor. The gallery you're supposedly opening already rented to someone else. The 50,000 Antoine needs it for gambling debts. My mother gasped. Sophie, is this true? Sophie's mask finally cracked completely. You don't understand. Antoine loves me. His marriage is just paper. The gallery fell through, but we'll find another space. With what money? I asked. The 100,000 in loans you took out in Mom and Dad's names. The final bombshell exploded in the room. My parents turned to Sophie in horror. What loans? My father asked weakly. I spread the evidence on the table. Credit cards, personal loans, lines of credit, all in my parents' names, all funneled to accounts Sophie controlled. I was going to pay it back, Sophie said desperately. Once the gallery was successful, it was an investment. It was fraud, Linda stated. Federal fraud, given that some of these were done across state lines. Sophie collapsed into a chair, the weight of her lies finally crushing her. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just spiraled. Like my life spiraled when I gave up everything for this family, I asked. Except you had choices, you had opportunity, you had success, and you still wanted more. The pastor who had been silent throughout finally spoke. I think we all need to take a breath and consider what's best for the family going forward. The family. I laughed bitterly. What family? The one that kicked me out for refusing to enable more theft. Eliza, please, my mother begged. We didn't know. If we'd known, you would have still chosen her. I finished. Because she's always been your golden child. The artist, the special one. That's not true, my father protested. Isn't it? Name one time in the last 12 years you chose my well-being over hers. Again, silence. Linda presented the terms I decided on. Sophie would pay restitution of $100,000 to my parents to clear the fraudulent debts. She would have no contact with family finances going forward. She would return to Paris or wherever she chose, but she wouldn't be welcome in the house without my permission. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges that could land her in federal prison. Where am I supposed to get $100,000? Sophie demanded. Sell your art, I suggested. You've done it before. Or ask Antoine's wife. I'm sure she'd be interested in your relationship. Sophie's face went white. You wouldn't. I've sent her everything, I said calmly. She deserves to know who her husband is involved with. My phone buzzed. A message in French that I ran through Google Translate. Antoine's wife thanking me for the information, letting me know she'd be filing for divorce, and that Antoine would be too busy with that to continue his affair with Sophie. I showed Sophie the message. She crumpled completely, all fight leaving her. I'll get the money, she whispered. I have some saved. I can sell pieces. I'll figure it out. You have 6 months, Linda said, producing a legal agreement. Sign this and Eliza won't pursue charges. Sophie signed with shaking hands. My parents sat through all of this like they were watching their world end, which I suppose they were. The daughter they'd pinned all their hopes on was a fraud. The daughter they'd ignored had been their salvation. Eliza. My mother reached for me. Can you ever forgive us? I pulled back. Forgiveness isn't the issue. The issue is that I need to heal from 12 years of being invisible, unvalued, and ultimately discarded. That doesn't happen overnight. What about us? My father asked. Where will we live? I thought about this long and hard. Despite everything, I couldn't throw them out the way they'd been willing to throw me out. You can stay, I said, but as tenants. You'll pay rent $800 a month, which is below market rate. That will go toward the property taxes and maintenance. Mom's medication is still your responsibility. I'll help in genuine emergencies, but I'm done being the default solution. That's fair, my father said quietly. More than fair. I'm also going back to school, I announced. I've been accepted to a program for non-traditional students pursuing medicine. It's part-time, designed for working adults. I'll be keeping my jobs, but my education comes first now. My mother was crying steadily now. We ruined your life. No, I corrected. You derailed it. But I'm getting back on track. Sophie stood to leave, gathering the remnants of her dignity. At the door, she turned back. I did love you, she said. I just loved myself more. It was probably the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. After everyone left, I walked through my house really mine for the first time. I touched the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the windows I'd replaced. This place held so much pain, but also so much of my strength. I sat on the porch steps where I'd cried that night they kicked me out. But this time I wasn't crying. I was planning. Medical school at 34 wouldn't be easy, but nothing in my life had been easy. The difference was now I was doing it for me. Marie had told me something when I'd moved out of her spare room and back into my house. You know what your problem was? You were so busy being needed that you forgot to be necessary to yourself. She was right. For 12 years, I'd been the foundation everyone else built their lives on, never realizing I was sinking into the ground. Now it was time to build something for myself. The first year after everything fell apart was the hardest and the most liberating. Sophie managed to pay back $60,000 in the first 6 months by selling her entire collection and some pieces she'd been holding for investment. The remaining $40,000 came from taking a regular job at an advertising firm in New York, using her artistic skills for commercial purposes. She hated every minute of it, but it was that or prison. We didn't speak except through lawyers. I heard from my mother that Sophie had broken up with Antoine after his wife's divorce lawyer contacted her. She was living in a small apartment in Brooklyn, a far cry from her Parisian loft. Part of me felt sorry for her, but mostly I felt relieved that she was facing consequences for the first time in her life. My parents struggled to adjust to our new dynamic. They paid rent on time, kept to themselves mostly, and slowly began to see me as a person rather than a resource. My father finally found part-time work at a hardware store, something that gave him purpose and a small income. My mother joined a diabetes support group and learned to manage her condition better, reducing her medication costs. The boundaries I set were rigid at first. No dropping by my part of the house without invitation. No asking for money outside of genuine emergencies. No guilt trips about family obligations. It was awkward, painful even, but necessary. I threw myself into my studies with the hunger of someone who'd been starved of learning for over a decade. The program for non-traditional pre-med students was demanding but flexible. I studied during breaks at the diner between bookkeeping clients in the late hours when the house was quiet. My classmates were an interesting mix, mostly people like me who'd had their dreams deferred by life. There was James, a former military medic going back for his degree; Maria, who'd raised 3 kids before deciding to pursue medicine; David, who'd worked in pharmaceutical sales but wanted to actually help people rather than just sell to them. We formed a study group that met at my house on weekends. My mother would sometimes bring us cookies and coffee, a small gesture that began to bridge the gap between us. She never stayed long, respecting the boundary, but I could see the pride in her eyes when she looked at my medical textbooks. "I found your old MCAT scores," she told me one day, hesitant at my door. "You scored in the 95th percentile." I don't think I ever said how proud that made me. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. Small moments like that began to accumulate. My father fixed my car without being asked, leaving a note that said, "Noticed it was making a noise. Should run better now." They started attending family therapy, working through their issues with favoritism and enabling behavior. I wasn't ready to fully forgive, but I was learning to let go of the anger that had been eating me alive. The second year brought unexpected changes. Linda, the lawyer who'd helped me, offered me a part-time position at her firm, doing financial analysis for cases. The pay was better than my 3 jobs combined, and the hours were more flexible for school. I also started therapy myself, working through years of being the family sacrifice. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me understand that my identity had been so wrapped up in being needed that I didn't know who I was outside of that role. "You're grieving," she told me. "Not just the family you thought you had, but the person you were. The girl who gave up everything. She served her purpose, but she's not who you are anymore." She was right. I was becoming someone new, someone who had boundaries, dreams of her own, and the courage to pursue them. My grades were excellent, good enough that my advisor suggested I apply for medical schools earlier than planned. "You're ready," she said. "Your life experience combined with your academic performance makes you an excellent candidate." I applied to 10 schools, including Northwestern, though I didn't expect much from my former institution. The application essays were cathartic, writing about my journey, the detour my life had taken, and what it taught me about sacrifice, resilience, and the importance of self-advocacy. The acceptance letters started arriving in March. Johns Hopkins, University of Michigan, Columbia, and then the one that made me cry, Northwestern, welcoming me back to finish what I'd started 14 years ago. I chose Northwestern. It felt like coming full circle, reclaiming the path that had been taken from me. The day I got my acceptance, I found my parents in the kitchen. They looked up nervously when I entered, still uncertain of their welcome in my victories. I got into medical school, I said simply. Northwestern, I start in the fall. My mother burst into tears, and my father stood up, then sat down unsure if he was allowed to hug me. You can be happy for me, I said, softening slightly. Just remember, this is my achievement, not yours to claim. They nodded, understanding. My mother reached out tentatively, and I let her take my hand. We're so proud of you, she whispered, and so sorry it took us this long to see you. Sophie heard about my acceptance through our mother. She sent a card, brief and formal. Congratulations on medical school, you deserve it. No return address, but the postmark was from Brooklyn. I didn't respond, but I kept the card. Maybe someday we'd find our way back to being sisters. But that day was not today. As I prepared for medical school, I hired a property management company to handle the house. I'd be living on campus, fully immersing myself in the experience I'd been denied. My parents would continue as tenants, the rent going toward my tuition. The night before I left for school, I stood in my empty room, the same room where I'd made the decision to sacrifice my dreams for my family's survival. But instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Not for the sacrifice itself, but for surviving it, for finding my way back to myself. I thought about Sophie's last words to me, that she loved me, but loved herself more. For years, I'd loved everyone else more than myself. Now finally, I was learning to put myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of the radical understanding that I deserved my own love and investment as much as anyone else. The house was quiet as I walked through it one last time before leaving. In the kitchen, I'd left a note for my parents. Thank you for the room and board for 18 years. The next 4 years are mine. Please water the plants. It was a small joke, a tiny bridge toward healing. We might never be the close family we could have been, but we could be something new, something honest. I drove away as the sun set, my car loaded with textbooks and hope. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another building on a street full of memories. Ahead of me, the highway stretched toward Chicago, toward Northwestern, toward the future I'd almost given up on. At 36, I was finally beginning the life I'd put on hold at 20. It wasn't the path I'd planned, but it was mine, earned through fire and determination. Medical school would be hard. Residency would be harder. But I'd survived betrayal, abandonment, and the complete collapse of my family structure. I'd rebuilt myself from scratch, claimed my worth, and learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to disappear into their needs. The radio played softly as I drove some song about new beginnings and second chances. I turned it up, windows down, fall air rushing through the car. For the first time in 14 years, I felt truly free. I had fought for this moment, this freedom, this future, and I had won. The house I'd battled for stood as proof that I existed, that my contributions mattered, that my sacrifices had value. But more than that, it stood as a monument to the moment I finally chose myself. I'd learned the hard way that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect, recognition, and the willingness to see each other as whole people, not just supporting characters in someone else's story. Sophie had her art. My parents had their golden child fantasies. But I had something more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive anything, rebuild everything, and still choose hope over bitterness. As I pulled onto the Northwestern campus, seeing the familiar buildings I'd left behind so many years ago, I didn't feel like I was returning. I felt like I was arriving for the first time as the person I was always meant to be. The house I'd fought for now stands as more than property. It's a monument to my worth, which was never measured in what I gave, but in finally learning I deserve to receive. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, If you've given everything and received nothing in return, know this: your worth is not determined by how much you sacrifice. You deserve to be seen valued and chosen, especially by yourself. What boundaries do you need to set with your family? Have you ever had to choose between helping others and saving yourself? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, redemption, and the courage to choose yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their sacrifices matter, but their dreams matter more. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the best investment you can make is in your own future.